She accidentally sent a bikini picture to the Millionaire CEO, and his reaction changed everything. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew she shouldn't have been so careless with her phone, but sometimes fate has its own plans. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor, casting geometric shadows across the pristine marble lobby of Dempsey Industries. The building hummed with the quiet efficiency of New York's financial district, where million-dollar decisions were made before most people had their first cup of coffee. Tasha stepped out of the elevator, her heels clicking against the polished floor with practiced confidence. At 28, she carried herself with the poise of someone who had learned to navigate corporate America with grace and determination. Her rich mahogany skin glowed under the office lighting, and her natural hair was styled in a sleek, low bun that perfectly complemented the structured lines of her navy blazer. She was the kind of beautiful that stopped conversations, not flashy, but undeniably striking in her intelligence and quiet strength. "Morning, Tasha," called Marcus, the security guard, tipping his cap with a warm smile. "Good morning, Marcus. How's little Sophia doing with her piano lessons?" "Getting better every day, thanks for asking. That book you recommended really helped." Tasha smiled genuinely. She had that gift, remembering the small details about people that made them feel seen. It was one of the many reasons she excelled as an executive assistant, though she sometimes wondered if people noticed her mind as much as they appreciated her organizational skills. Her phone buzzed as she walked toward her desk, positioned strategically outside the corner office that belonged to Patrick Dempsey, CEO, owner, and the man who had built this empire from a small investment firm his grandfather had left him. The text was from her best friend Riley. "Girl, you have to see this sunset from my trip to Barbados. I'm living my best life over here." Tasha chuckled, remembering her own weekend at Montauk Beach. She had taken a spontaneous trip, something completely unlike her usual plan-to-the-minute lifestyle. The photo she'd snapped of herself in a simple black bikini, laughing as the waves caught her feet, was still saved in her phone. It wasn't provocative, just joyful, natural, the kind of candid shot that captured a rare moment of complete freedom. She settled at her desk, coffee steaming beside her keyboard, and pulled out her phone to respond to Riley. "Wait until you see my beach day. Sometimes us corporate girls need to remember how to have fun too." She scrolled through her photos, found the one from Montauk, and attached it to the message. Her fingers moved quickly. She had 15 minutes before Patrick arrived, and she wanted to clear her personal messages before diving into the day's agenda. She hit send. The phone made that soft whoosh sound, and Tasha set it aside, reaching for her coffee. It was only when the screen lit up again, showing the message confirmation, that her blood turned to ice. Message sent to Patrick Dempsey. "No," she whispered, her coffee mug frozen halfway to her lips. "No, no, no." Her hands shook as she grabbed the phone, staring at the confirmation that made her stomach plummet to somewhere around the building's basement level. The photo, her photo in a bikini, laughing and carefree, had just landed in her boss's inbox. Patrick Dempsey, the man who could fire half the building with a single email, the man whose dating life was constantly speculated about in business magazines, who had been voted one of New York's most eligible bachelors for 3 years running, who never mixed business with personal anything. Tasha's mind raced through damage control scenarios. Delete the message. Impossible, it was already delivered. Pretend it never happened. Also, impossible. Patrick read every message immediately. Quit before he saw it. Her rent was due next week. "Think, Tasha, think," she muttered, pulling up his contact to send a follow-up message. But what could she possibly say? "Sorry, wrong person. Please ignore my beach body." The elevator chimed across the hall. Tasha looked up to see Patrick Dempsey stepping onto the floor, and her heart forgot how to beat properly. At 36, he was the kind of handsome that belonged in magazines, tall and lean with an athlete's build that his perfectly tailored charcoal suits couldn't quite hide. His dark hair had just enough gray at the temples to suggest wisdom beyond his years, and his green eyes held an intensity that could dissect a business proposal, or apparently make her forget how to breathe. He walked with the quiet confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world, never questioned whether he belonged in the rooms where he made decisions that affected thousands of lives. "Good morning, Tasha," he said, his voice carrying that slight gravelly quality she'd noticed after his morning runs in Central Park, a routine she only knew about because she scheduled his calendar around it. "Good morning, Mr. Dempsey," she managed, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. He paused at her desk, and for a terrifying moment, she thought he might mention the photo. Instead, he simply said, "The Morrison contracts need to be reviewed before 10. And cancel my lunch with Henderson. Something more urgent came up." "Of course, anything else?" His eyes lingered on her face for just a second longer than usual, but his expression remained unreadable. "That's all for now." He disappeared into his office, and Tasha exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Maybe he hadn't seen it yet. Maybe there was still time to figure out how to explain, or pray, or possibly relocate to a different continent. 20 minutes passed. 30. Tasha threw herself into work, reorganizing files that didn't need reorganizing, answering emails with unusual enthusiasm. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart performed another gymnastics routine. At 10:47 a.m., Patrick's office door opened. "Tasha, could you step in here for a moment?" Her legs felt like water, but she forced herself to walk steadily into his office. The space was a study in controlled luxury, dark wood, leather chairs, and windows that offered a view of Manhattan that most people only saw in movies. Patrick stood behind his desk, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city skyline. "Close the door, please." Oh God, this was it. This was how her career ended. Not with poor performance or office politics, but with a bikini photo sent to the wrong contact. "I received an interesting message from you this morning," he said, still facing the window. Tasha's mouth went dry. "Mr. Dempsey, I can explain—" "Can you?" He turned around, and there was something different in his expression. Not anger exactly, but something she couldn't quite identify. "Because I'm curious about the explanation for—" He paused, and in that silence, Tasha felt her entire professional life hanging by a thread. "For why you've been hiding the fact that you have an actual life outside this office." And in that moment, she realized this conversation was going to change everything, though she had no idea if it would destroy her world or rebuild it entirely. Sometimes the most dangerous conversations are the ones that start with kindness. Tasha blinked, certain she had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" Patrick leaned against his desk, crossing his arms in a way that made his expensive shirt pull slightly across his chest. The gesture was casual, almost intimate, nothing like the formal distance he usually maintained. "In 3 years, I've seen you arrive before anyone else, leave after most people have gone home, and handle crises that would make seasoned executives break into a cold sweat, but I've never seen you relaxed." His green eyes held hers steadily. "Happy, even." "Mr. Dempsey, Patrick," he corrected quietly. "And you're not in trouble, Tasha, far from it." The relief that flooded through her was so intense, she had to grip the back of the leather chair to steady herself. "I can't apologize enough for the inappropriate message. It was meant for my friend Riley, and I was distracted and—" "Stop." The word was gentle, but firm. "You're apologizing for being human." He moved around the desk, and suddenly the spacious office felt smaller, more intimate. Patrick had always been tall. She knew that intellectually. But standing this close, she could see the faint lines around his eyes that spoke of long nights and difficult decisions, could catch the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with something that was purely him. "Do you know what I thought when I saw that photo?" he asked. Tasha shook her head, not trusting her voice. "I thought, there she is, the real Tasha. Not the polished professional who never lets her guard down, not the woman who apologizes for taking lunch breaks. Just you." Her heart was doing things that definitely weren't covered in the employee handbook. "I don't understand." Patrick was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her skin warm. "You've worked here for 3 years. In all that time, you've never taken a sick day, never complained about overtime, never asked for anything beyond what you've earned. You handle my schedule better than I do. You remember my mother's birthday when I forget, and you somehow make sure there's always decent coffee in this place. That's my job," she said softly. "No," he shook his head. "Your job is to be my assistant. Everything else, the way you make this place feel less like a corporate machine and more like somewhere people actually want to work, that's just who you are." Tasha felt exposed under his gaze, as if he could see through all the careful layers she'd built around herself. "Patrick, I think we should probably have dinner with me." The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back or ignore. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Have dinner with me," he repeated, his voice lower now, more certain. Tonight. We can't. Tasha's mind raced through all the reasons this was a terrible idea. The company has policies about. Screw the policies. The vehemence in his voice startled them both. Patrick ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd never seen from him before. It made him look younger, more vulnerable. Do you know how many company dinners I sit through? How many business lunches where I discuss quarterly projections over mediocre food with people who only care about what I can do for them? He stepped closer, and Tasha's breath caught. I want to have dinner with someone who remembers that my coffee order changes when I'm stressed, someone who quietly handled the entire Henderson merger while I was dealing with my father's surgery and never once asked for credit. You knew about that? She asked, surprised. I know a lot of things, Tasha. I know you donate money to Marcus's daughter's school fund every month. I know you stay late, not because you have to, but because you actually care about getting things right. And I know that somewhere beneath all that professionalism is a woman who takes spontaneous beach trips and looks absolutely radiant when she's not trying to be perfect. The sincerity in his voice was devastating. Tasha felt her carefully constructed boundaries beginning to crumble. This is complicated. The best things usually are. Before she could respond, his phone rang, the external line that only rang for emergency calls. Patrick glanced at it, then at her, clearly torn. Take it, she said quickly, grateful for the interruption. We can talk about this later. He hesitated, then answered the call with a crisp, Dempsey. Tasha used the distraction to escape to her desk, her mind spinning. Everything she thought she knew about their professional relationship had just been turned upside down. Patrick Dempsey, the man she'd watched command boardrooms full of powerful men who'd built a billion-dollar company through sheer will and intelligence, had just asked her to dinner. And the terrifying part wasn't that he'd asked. It was how badly she wanted to say yes. Her phone buzzed with a text from Riley. How's the corporate grind today? Still living that assistant life? Tasha stared at the message, then glanced toward Patrick's office, where she could hear him handling whatever crisis had interrupted their conversation. Through the glass wall she could see him in profile, focused, commanding every inch the successful CEO the business world knew him to be. But now she also knew the man who'd noticed her coffee donations, who'd paid attention to her work on the Henderson merger, who thought she looked radiant when she stopped trying to be perfect. She typed back to Riley, "Something tells me today is going to be very different from usual." The office door opened, and Patrick emerged, slipping his phone into his pocket. His eyes found hers immediately. "Crisis averted," he said, approaching her desk. "Where were we?" "Patrick," she began, but he held up a hand. 7 o'clock, Maria on Central Park South. Not a business dinner, a real one. Just think about it, okay? He walked toward the elevator without waiting for an answer, leaving Tasha staring after him with her world completely off its axis. And as she watched him disappear behind the closing elevator doors, she realized she'd already made her decision, even if she wasn't ready to admit it yet. Some choices feel impossible until you realize you've already made them. Tasha stared at her reflection in the restroom mirror, gripping the marble countertop until her knuckles went pale. The afternoon had crawled by in a haze of routine tasks that felt anything but routine when your boss had just upended your entire understanding of your relationship. "Get it together," she whispered to herself. "It's just dinner." But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. Nothing about Patrick Dempsey was just anything. Her phone buzzed, a text from her sister Zara. "Mom wants to know if you're bringing anyone to Sunday dinner this week. I told her you're too busy being a corporate robot to date." Tasha almost laughed. If only Zara knew that her corporate robot sister was currently having a crisis over her billionaire boss asking her out. She typed back, "Still robotically single. Tell Mom I'll bring dessert instead of a boyfriend." The response came quickly. "She says dessert doesn't give her grandchildren." Her words, not mine. This time Tasha did laugh, though it came out shaky. Her family lived in a comfortable middle-class neighborhood in Queens, where her mother ran a small accounting practice and her father taught high school history. They were proud of her success, but they also worried that she'd lost herself somewhere in the Manhattan skyline. Maybe they weren't wrong. She checked the time, 4:30 p.m. 2.5 hours until 7 o'clock. 2.5 hours to decide whether she was brave enough to cross a line she'd spent 3 years carefully avoiding. Back at her desk, Tasha tried to focus on quarterly reports, but her eyes kept drifting to Patrick's office. He was on a conference call, gesturing animatedly as he spoke to someone on his headset. She'd seen him like this hundreds of times. but now she noticed things she'd trained herself to ignore. The way his jaw tensed when he was concentrating, how he loosened his tie when a call ran long, the rare smile that transformed his entire face when a deal went well. "Earth to Tasha," came a voice behind her. She turned to find Devon, one of the junior analysts, holding a stack of files with an amused expression. For 24, Devon was smart, funny, and had been trying to ask her out for months with the persistence of someone who genuinely believed she'd eventually say yes. "Sorry, just reviewing these Morrison documents," she said, gesturing vaguely at her computer screen. "Uh-huh." Devon perched on the edge of her desk with the casual confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. "You know, you've been staring at that same page for like 10 minutes. Everything okay?" "Fine. Just tired." "Well, maybe you need to get out more. Speaking of which, and I know you're going to say no, but I'm contractually obligated to ask, there's this new jazz club in Brooklyn. Great music, amazing food, and I promise I won't talk about work all night." Tasha looked at Devon, really looked at him. He was attractive in an easy, uncomplicated way. Dating him would be simple, safe, normal. Her mother would love him. There would be no power dynamics, no company policies to navigate, no risk of losing everything she'd worked for. "Devon, I know. You don't date co-workers. But technically I'm not in your department, so—" "It's not about departments," she interrupted gently. "It's just complicated right now." Something in her tone must have gotten through to him because his playful expression shifted to concern. "Hey, you sure you're okay? You seem different today." Before she could answer, Patrick's office door opened. He emerged, still talking on his headset, but his eyes immediately found her desk and Devon sitting on it. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Patrick finished his call with a curt, "We'll discuss this tomorrow," and removed his headset. His gaze shifted between Tasha and Devon with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. "Devon," Patrick said, his voice perfectly professional, but somehow carrying an edge. "Don't you have the Hartwell projections to finish?" "Yes, sir. Just delivering these files to Tasha." Devon stood quickly, suddenly looking much younger than his 24 years. "I'll get right on those projections." He practically fled toward the elevator. Patrick approached her desk with measured steps, his hands in his pockets. "Friend of yours?" "Co-worker," Tasha replied carefully. "He seems attentive." There was something in his tone, not quite jealousy but definitely territorial, that sent an unexpected thrill through her. "He's a good analyst." "I'm sure he is." Patrick's eyes held hers. "Have you thought about tonight?" The question hung between them, loaded with possibility and risk. Tasha was acutely aware that the office was still bustling around them, that anyone could overhear, that this conversation was already too intimate for their professional setting. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "And?" She looked up at him, this man who'd somehow seen through all her carefully constructed walls, who'd noticed things about her that she thought she'd hidden, who was offering her something she hadn't even realized she wanted. "I don't know how to do this," she said honestly. "I've spent 3 years keeping everything separate. Professional is professional, personal is personal. I don't know how to blur those lines." Patrick's expression softened. "Maybe that's exactly why you should try. And if it goes badly, if this ruins everything, then we'll deal with it together." He paused, then added more quietly, "But what if it doesn't go badly? What if it goes perfectly?" The hope in his voice was devastating. Tasha felt the last of her resistance crumbling. "Maria, 7 o'clock, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The smile that spread across Patrick's face was like sunrise after a long night. "I'll pick you up." "No," she said quickly. "I'll meet you there. I need to do this my way." "Of course." He nodded, understanding without explanation. "Tasha?" "Yeah? For what it's worth, I think you're braver than you give yourself credit for." As he walked back to his office, Tasha realized her hands were shaking. She'd just agreed to have dinner with Patrick Dempsey. Not her boss, not the CEO, Patrick, the man who'd been watching her as carefully as she'd been watching him, who'd seen past her professional facade to something real underneath. Her phone buzzed with another text from Zara. "Change of plans. Mum's making your favorite pasta tonight. Family dinner at 6. Tasha stared at the message, then glanced toward Patrick's office, where he was already back to work, completely focused and controlled. She typed back, "Can't make it tonight. I have a meeting. A meeting on Friday night." "Tasha, you seriously need to get a life." And for the first time in 3 years, she realized she was about to do exactly that. The hardest part about taking a leap isn't the falling. It's the moment before you jump. Tasha's apartment in Brooklyn Heights was a study in controlled chaos. Clothes were scattered across her bed, rejected outfits forming small mountains of indecision. She'd tried on everything from conservative business casual to a cocktail dress that felt too much like she was trying too hard. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, holding up a simple black dress. Elegant but not flashy, professional but not cold. "It's just dinner." But her reflection in the bedroom mirror told a different story. Her dark eyes were bright with nervous excitement, and there was a flush to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the apartment's heating. She looked like a woman preparing for something that could change everything. Her phone rang, and Riley's name lit up the screen. "Please tell me you're calling with a fashion emergency and not another sunset photo," Tasha answered, pinning the phone between her ear and shoulder as she stepped into the dress. "Girl, you sound weird. What's going on?" Tasha hesitated. Riley had been her best friend since college, but explaining her current situation felt surreal even to herself. "I have a date." "What?" Riley's shriek was loud enough that Tasha had to hold the phone away from her ear. "When? Who? How did this happen? And why am I just hearing about this now? It's complicated." "Complicated how? Is he married? Criminal? Related to you?" "He's my boss." The silence on the other end was deafening. "Riley? I'm sorry. Did you just say your boss, Patrick Dempsey, the billionaire ice king who barely speaks to humans?" Tasha winced at the description, though she understood why Riley saw him that way. Patrick's public persona was all sharp suits and sharper business decisions. "He's not an ice king, he's just private." "Tasha Marie, you have lost your mind. This is the same man you've complained about working for because he expects perfection 24/7. "I never complained about working for him," Tasha protested, checking her reflection one more time. The dress hugged her curves without being too revealing, and she'd left her hair down in loose waves that framed her face naturally. "You literally called me last month ranting about how he made you redo the Morrison proposal 3 times because he didn't like the font." "That wasn't ranting, that was venting. And he was right about the font. It was too casual for a $50 million deal." Riley groaned. "You're defending him. Oh, honey, you're in deeper than I thought." Tasha sank onto her bed, suddenly feeling the weight of what she was about to do. "What if I'm making a huge mistake? What if this ruins everything I've worked for?" "Hey," Riley's voice softened. "When's the last time you did something just because you wanted to? Not because it was smart or safe or the right career move, but because it made your heart race a little." Tasha thought about it. "Honestly? Probably that beach trip last weekend." "Exactly. And look how that turned out. It got you a date with a billionaire." Despite her nerves, Tasha laughed. "That's not exactly how it happened. Details, shumdetails. The point is, maybe it's time to stop planning every move 5 steps ahead and just see what happens." 20 minutes later, Tasha stood outside Maria, watching well-dressed couples disappear through the restaurant's elegant entrance. The evening air carried the scent of autumn, crisp leaves and the promise of change. Manhattan's energy hummed around her, but she felt suspended in a moment of perfect uncertainty. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patrick. "I'm at the bar, take your time." The simple message steadied her nerves. He wasn't pressuring her, wasn't assuming anything, just letting her know he was there when she was ready. She walked through the entrance, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The restaurant was everything she'd expected: understated luxury, soft lighting, the kind of place where million-dollar deals were sealed over wine that cost more than her monthly rent. Patrick stood at the bar, and Tasha's breath caught. Gone was the formal business attire she was used to seeing him in. Instead, he wore dark jeans that fit him perfectly and a navy button-down with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He looked relaxed, approachable, devastatingly handsome in a way that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with the man underneath the CEO facade. He turned as she approached, and the smile that lit up his face made her stomach flip. "So you came," he said softly, standing to greet her. "Did you think I wouldn't? I hoped you would, but I wouldn't have blamed you if you'd changed your mind." The hostess approached before Tasha could respond. "Mr. Dempsey, your table is ready." They were led to a corner table with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. The view was spectacular, but Tasha found herself more interested in watching Patrick navigate the restaurant. He was polite to the staff without being condescending, confident without being arrogant. She'd seen him in boardrooms commanding attention, but this was different, more natural, more real. "This is beautiful," she said, settling into her chair. "I thought you might like it. You mentioned once that you used to run in Central Park on weekends." "You remember that?" The conversation had been months ago, a casual comment she'd made while scheduling his morning meetings. "I remember most things you tell me, Tasha." His green eyes held hers across the table. "The question is, what else don't I know about you?" The waiter appeared with wine menus, and Patrick ordered a bottle of something Italian that Tasha had never heard of. As they waited, she found herself really looking at him, not as her boss, but as Patrick. There were laugh lines around his eyes she'd never noticed, and when he smiled, there was a boyish quality that made him seem younger than his 36 years. "This is strange," she admitted. "Good strange or bad strange? I'm not sure yet." She paused as the wine arrived, waiting until they were alone again. "I keep expecting you to start talking about quarterly projections or the Henderson merger." Patrick laughed, a rich sound that sent warmth through her chest. "No business talk tonight. I want to know about the woman who takes spontaneous beach trips and looks like she's discovered something wonderful. It wasn't that spontaneous. I planned it for weeks, but you went alone. That takes courage. Or desperation for some time away from spreadsheets. Maybe both." He raised his wine glass. "To beach trips and beautiful mistakes." Tasha felt heat rise in her cheeks as she clinked her glass against his. "To taking chances, I suppose." And as the wine warmed her from the inside, and Patrick's genuine laughter filled the space between them, she began to understand that some risks were worth taking, even if you couldn't see where they would lead. The most intimate moments happen when we stop pretending to be perfect. 2 hours later, their dinner plates had been cleared, but neither Patrick nor Tasha seemed eager to leave. The restaurant had grown quieter as the evening progressed, and their corner table felt like its own private world, insulated from the rest of Manhattan by wine, laughter, and the kind of conversation that revealed layers neither had expected to share. "So let me get this straight," Patrick said, leaning back in his chair with an amused smile. "You have a master's degree in business administration, you speak 3 languages fluently, and you once talked a potential investor out of backing our biggest competitor. But you're telling me you're just an executive assistant?" Tasha swirled the wine in her glass, avoiding his gaze. "I like what I do. There's satisfaction in making sure everything runs smoothly." "That's not what I asked." His voice was gentle but persistent. "Why are you hiding behind that job title when you could be running your own company?" The question hit closer to home than she'd expected. Tasha had asked herself the same thing countless times, usually at 2 a.m. when she couldn't sleep, and her mind wandered to all the paths she hadn't taken. "Maybe because it's safer," she admitted. "I grew up watching my parents work twice as hard as everyone else just to prove they belonged. My mom built her accounting practice from nothing, but she still gets clients who are surprised she knows what she's doing. My dad has been teaching for 15 years, but he still gets parents who request a more experienced teacher for their kids." Patrick's expression grew serious. "And you think staying in a support role protects you from that?" "I think it's easier to be excellent at something people expect you to do well than to fight for something they don't think you deserve." The honesty of her own words surprised her. She'd never articulated that fear so clearly before, not even to herself. "That's bullshit," Patrick said softly. Tasha's eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me? You heard me. That's complete bullshit, and you know it." He leaned forward, his intensity focused entirely on her. "Do you think I built this company by playing it safe? Do you think I became a billionaire before 40 by worrying about what people expected from me? That's different. You're, what? White, male, born with advantages you didn't have." His voice remained low, but there was steel in it. "Yes, I was. And that's exactly why I recognize excellence when I see it, regardless of who's demonstrating it." Tasha felt something crack open in her chest, a wound she'd been protecting for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "You want to know why I really asked you to dinner?" Patrick continued. "It wasn't just because of that photo, though seeing you happy and unguarded was a revelation. It's because in 3 years of working together, you've challenged me more than any board member, any competitor, any business partner I've ever dealt with. And you did it while pretending to be just my assistant." "Patrick, the Henderson merger? That wasn't my strategy. It was yours. You left those suggestions on my desk every morning until I was smart enough to listen. The Morrison contracts. You caught the liability clause that would have cost us millions. The Hartwell deal that everyone said was impossible. You figured out how to make it work." Tasha stared at him, speechless. She'd thought she'd been subtle, thought she'd been careful to frame her ideas as questions or observations rather than directives. "You knew," she whispered. "I've known for a long time. The question is, when are you going to know it?" The waiter appeared discreetly to refill their wine glasses, giving Tasha a moment to process Patrick's words. When they were alone again, She found herself looking at him with new eyes, not as the demanding boss she'd spent 3 years trying to please, but as a man who'd been paying attention in ways she'd never realized. "Why didn't you say anything before?" she asked. "Because I was afraid," he admitted, and the vulnerability in his voice caught her off guard. "Afraid that if I acknowledged what you were capable of, you'd realize you didn't need this job, that you'd leave. And now? Now I'm more afraid of letting you underestimate yourself for another day." Tasha felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being truly seen. "I don't know how to be that person, the one who takes risks, who believes she deserves more." "Maybe you could start small," Patrick suggested, his voice gentler now. "Maybe you could start by having dessert with a man who's been falling for you for months and was too much of a coward to admit it." The words hung between them like a bridge neither could cross back over. Tasha felt her world tilt on its axis for the second time that day. "Patrick, I know this complicates everything. I know it goes against every professional boundary we've established. But Tasha, I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you is purely professional appreciation." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw past the confidence to the uncertainty underneath. Patrick Dempsey, who commanded boardrooms and closed billion-dollar deals, was nervous because of her. "What are you saying?" she asked quietly. "I'm saying that photo didn't change anything. It just made me brave enough to admit what was already true." He reached across the table, his fingers barely touching hers. "I'm saying that I don't want to be your boss anymore. I want to be the man who gets to see you smile like you did on that beach. I want to be someone worth your taking a risk on." Tasha felt her carefully constructed world crumbling around her, but instead of fear, she felt something that might have been freedom. The walls she'd built to protect herself suddenly felt less like safety and more like a prison. "The dessert menu here is supposed to be excellent," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Patrick's smile was radiant. "I hear the chocolate soufflé is worth the risk." And as he signaled for the waiter, Tasha realized she was about to discover what it felt like to stop playing it safe. One perfect, terrifying moment at a time. The morning after you change your life, everything looks different, including yourself. Tasha's alarm went off at 6 a.m., just like every other Monday morning for the past 3 years. But as she reached across her bed to silence it, her hand brushed against something that definitely hadn't been there before: Patrick's business card, with his personal number written on the back in his careful handwriting. The memories of the previous evening came flooding back in vivid detail. The chocolate soufflé they'd shared while talking, until the restaurant staff started stacking chairs around them. The walk through Central Park, where Patrick had taken her hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. The way he'd kissed her goodnight outside her apartment building. Soft, tentative, full of promise and possibility. "Oh God," she whispered to her empty bedroom. "What have I done?" Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, though she recognized it immediately. "Good morning. I hope you slept well. No pressure about today. We'll figure it out as we go. P." The message was so perfectly Patrick, considerate, careful, giving her space to process without abandoning her to uncertainty. She stared at it for a long moment, then typed back, "Good morning. See you at the office." It took her 3 attempts to pick out clothes. Everything felt wrong. Too formal, too casual, too much like she was trying to signal something she wasn't sure she understood yet. Finally, she settled on a navy dress that was professional, but softer than her usual blazers, paired with the pearl earrings her grandmother had left her. The subway ride into Manhattan was a blur of Monday morning commuters, but Tasha felt separate from all of it, like she was watching the world through glass. Every familiar sight, the same coffee cart, the same newspaper stand, the same route she'd taken for 3 years, looked different when you were a different person walking through it. "Morning, Tasha," Marcus called, as she entered the Dempsey Industries building. "You look nice today. Special occasion?" "Just Monday," she replied, but she could hear the uncertainty in her own voice. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt eternal. What was the protocol for this? How did you face someone who'd held your hand under the stars when you'd spent 3 years maintaining professional distance? The office was already buzzing with its usual Monday energy. Jennifer from marketing was arguing with someone on the phone about campaign budgets. Thomas from legal was speedwalking toward the conference room with an armload of contracts. Everything was exactly as it had always been, except for the fundamental shift in Tasha's universe. Patrick's office was dark. He usually arrived by 7:30, but it was only 7:15. Tasha settled at her desk and tried to focus on his calendar for the day. Board meeting at 9. lunch with potential investors at noon, conference call with the London office at 3. All normal, all routine, nothing that acknowledged the earthquake that had happened between them. At exactly 7:28, the elevator chimed, and Patrick stepped onto the floor. Tasha's heart performed its new favorite gymnastics routine as she watched him approach. He looked exactly as he always did, perfectly tailored grey suit, crisp white shirt, dark hair slightly tousled from his morning run. But when his eyes met hers, there was something different there, warmer, more intimate. "Good morning, Tasha," he said, his voice carrying the same professional tone he'd always used. "Good morning, Mr. Dempsey," she replied automatically, then immediately felt foolish. After last night, Mr. Dempsey felt like a costume that no longer fit. He paused at her desk, and for a moment she thought he might say something about the previous evening. Instead, he simply asked, "Coffee?" It was their routine. She always had his coffee ready by 7:30, but something in his tone made it sound less like a request and more like an invitation. "Of course," she said, standing to retrieve it from the small kitchen area. As she prepared his usual, black, no-sugar Ethiopian blend, she became aware that he'd followed her into the kitchen. They were alone for the first time since he'd kissed her goodnight. "How are you feeling?" he asked quietly, leaning against the counter. "Confused," she admitted, not looking at him as she stirred his coffee. "Nervous, like I'm pretending to be someone I was yesterday." "You're not pretending. You're just being yourself in a new situation." She finally looked up at him. "How do we do this, Patrick? How do we be whatever this is and still work together?" "Carefully," he said, honestly, and probably with a lot of trial and error. Before she could respond, Devon appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking harried and clutching a tablet. "Oh, sorry," he said, glancing between them with obvious curiosity. "Didn't realize you were both. I just needed coffee." "Of course," Tasha said quickly, stepping away from Patrick. "I was just finishing up." She handed Patrick his coffee, their fingers brushing for just a moment, long enough for her to feel the warmth of his skin, short enough that Devon probably didn't notice. "Thank you," Patrick said, his voice perfectly professional again. To Devon, he added, "How are those Hartwell revisions coming along?" "Almost finished, sir. Should have them to you by 10. "Excellent." Patrick walked back toward his office, leaving Tasha alone with Devon, who was studying her with obvious interest. "You seem different today," Devon observed, pouring himself coffee from the machine. "Do I?" Tasha tried to keep her voice light. "Yeah. Happier, maybe? Did you have a good weekend?" The question was innocent, but Tasha felt heat rise in her cheeks. "It was eventful." "Well, whatever you did, it agrees with you. You're practically glowing." Before Tasha could figure out how to respond to that, her phone rang. She escaped back to her desk, grateful for the interruption. "Patrick Dempsey's office, this is Tasha." "Tasha, it's Catherine Morrison. Is Patrick available? We need to discuss the quarterly projections before the board meeting." "Let me check his schedule," Tasha said, pulling up his calendar even though she already knew he was free. It gave her something to focus on, besides the way Patrick was watching her through his office window. The morning passed in a blur of routine tasks that felt anything but routine. Every interaction with Patrick was charged with new meaning. The way he said thank you when she brought him documents, the careful distance he maintained when others were around, the text he sent at 10:30 that simply said, "You're doing great." It wasn't until her lunch break that the reality of her situation fully hit her. She was sitting in her usual spot in the small park across from the building, eating a salad and trying to process the past 18 hours, when her phone rang. "Zara," she answered, grateful for her sister's timing. "Okay, what's going on? You missed Sunday dinner, you've been weird all week, and Mom is convinced you're having some kind of crisis." "I'm not having a crisis," Tasha said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. "Then what's happening? And don't say nothing because I can hear it in your voice." Tasha looked up at the building where she worked, where Patrick was probably in his board meeting, where everything familiar had become complicated and terrifying and wonderful. "I think," she said slowly, "I might be falling in love with someone completely inappropriate." And as she said the words out loud for the first time, she realized they were already true, had been true longer than she'd been willing to admit. Some secrets have a way of revealing themselves at the worst possible moment. 3 weeks later, Tasha had almost convinced herself they could make this work. She and Patrick had fallen into a careful rhythm, professional during office hours, stolen moments in empty conference rooms, texts that made her smile during boring meetings. It felt sustainable, manageable, like they'd found a way to honor both their feelings and their responsibilities. She should have known it was too good to last. "Tasha, can I see you for a moment?" Linda Hartwell, the head of Human Resources, appeared at her desk with the kind of smile that never meant anything good. Tasha's stomach dropped, but she managed to keep her expression neutral. "Of course." Linda's office was on the 38th floor, 4 floors below Patrick's domain. The elevator ride felt interminable, and Tasha found herself mentally rehearsing explanations for things Linda might or might not know. "Please sit," Linda said, closing the door behind them. She was a woman in her 50s with steel-grey hair and eyes that missed nothing, the kind of person who could smell office drama from 3 departments away. Tasha settled into the chair across from Linda's desk, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I'll get straight to the point," Linda began, pulling out a file that looked ominously thick. "There have been some observations about your relationship with Mr. Dempsey." "Observations?" Tasha's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Late meetings that run unusually long, lunch schedules that don't match restaurant reservations, a certain tension between you two that some colleagues have noticed." Tasha's mind raced. Who had seen what? How careful had they actually been? "I'm not sure what you're implying," she said carefully. Linda's expression softened slightly. "Tasha, you're one of our most valued employees. Your work is exemplary. Your dedication is unquestionable, and frankly, Patrick has never functioned better than he has under your support." "Thank you," Tasha managed, "but this company has policies for a reason. Relationships between supervisors and subordinates create liability issues, perception problems, and frankly, they rarely end well for the person with less power." The words hit like a physical blow. Tasha had known this conversation might come, but hearing her worst fears articulated so bluntly made them feel inevitable. "What are you asking me to do?" she said quietly. "I'm asking you to consider a transfer. We have an opening in our Chicago office, senior project coordinator, substantial pay increase, complete autonomy. It would be a fresh start, away from any complications. Chicago, 2,000 miles away from everything she'd built, everyone she cared about, away from Patrick. And if I don't want to transfer?" Linda's pause said everything. "Then we'll need to have a more formal conversation about maintaining professional boundaries." Tasha felt the walls closing in around her. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. But Tasha, don't think too long. These situations have a way of resolving themselves, and it's usually better for everyone if the resolution is proactive rather than reactive." The elevator ride back to the 42nd floor was a blur. Tasha's hands were shaking as she sat down at her desk, trying to process what had just happened. Through Patrick's office window, she could see him on a conference call, animated and focused. He caught her eye and smiled, the small, private smile that had become her favorite thing about their new normal. Her phone buzzed with a text from him. "Dinner tonight? I have something I want to discuss with you." Under normal circumstances, the message would have filled her with anticipation. Now it felt like a cruel joke. She typed back, "We need to talk, but not here." The response came quickly. "Everything okay? I'll explain later." The afternoon crawled by. Tasha threw herself into work, organizing files with unnecessary precision, responding to emails with robotic efficiency, anything to avoid thinking about the choice Linda had laid out for her. At 6 o'clock, Patrick emerged from his office. The floor was mostly empty, just a few dedicated workaholics and the cleaning crew. "Ready to go?" he asked, approaching her desk. "Patrick," she began, then stopped. "How did you tell someone you were falling in love with that it might all be over?" "Hey," his voice was gentle, concerned. "What's wrong?" "Not here," she said quickly, glancing around the office. "Can we go somewhere private?" 20 minutes later, they were sitting in Patrick's car in the parking garage beneath the building. The concrete walls felt appropriately tomb-like for the conversation Tasha was about to have. "Linda Hartwell called me into her office today," she began without preamble. Patrick's jaw tightened. "What did she say?" "Someone's been watching us, talking. She offered me a transfer to Chicago." "Absolutely not." The vehemence in his voice surprised her. "Patrick, you don't understand. This isn't a request. It's a warning. Either I transfer, or they start a formal investigation into our relationship. Then we'll handle an investigation. I own this company, Tasha. I make the rules." "No, you don't." Her voice was sharper than she'd intended. "You can't just decide the rules don't apply to us because you're the CEO. That's exactly the kind of thinking that makes people talk." Patrick was quiet for a long moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "So, what are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe Linda is right. Maybe this was a mistake." The words tasted like ash in her mouth, but Tasha forced herself to say them. Someone had to be practical, and Patrick's protective instincts were clouding his judgment. "You don't mean that, don't I?" She turned to face him fully. "3 weeks ago I was excellent at my job, I was respected, I was building something meaningful. Now I'm the subject of office gossip and HR meetings. Because you're with me, yes." The admission hung between them like a confession. "Because I'm with you." Patrick's expression was stricken. "Tasha, I never wanted—" "I know you didn't, but that doesn't change where we are." They sat in silence, the weight of unspoken possibilities pressing down on them. Finally, Patrick spoke. "What if I promoted you, made you a vice president, eliminated the supervisor-subordinate issue? You think that would look better? The boss's girlfriend getting a mysterious promotion? You'd earn it. You've been doing VP-level work for months. That's not the point, and you know it." Another silence. Tasha could hear her own heartbeat in the enclosed space of the car. "So, what do we do?" Patrick asked quietly. Tasha closed her eyes, feeling the weight of a decision she wasn't ready to make. "I don't know. The dinner I wanted to take you to tonight," Patrick said suddenly. "It wasn't just dinner. I had something I wanted to ask you. Something important." Her eyes snapped open. "Patrick, don't— I love you." The words came out in a rush, desperate and honest. "I know it's complicated, I know it's messy, but I love you, Tasha, and I was going to ask you to move in with me." And as his words hung in the air between them, Tasha realized that some complications don't have easy solutions. They only have choices that change everything. Love doesn't always conquer all. Sometimes it just makes the stakes higher. Tasha stared at Patrick across the dim interior of his car, his confession hanging between them like a bridge she wasn't sure she was brave enough to cross. The parking garage felt airless, the concrete walls pressing in on all sides. "You love me," she repeated quietly, testing the words. "Yes." His voice was steady now, certain. "I love the way you remember everyone's birthday. I love how you bite your lip when you're concentrating. I love that you see solutions where everyone else sees problems. I love you, Tasha." Tears pricked at her eyes, not from joy, but from the cruel timing of it all. "This is the worst possible moment for you to tell me that, or the most important moment." Patrick reached for her hand and she let him take it. "Because I need you to know that this isn't just about convenience or attraction or some executive having a midlife crisis. This is about the woman I want to build a life with." "Patrick," she started, but he pressed on. "Move in with me. Not because of the office politics, not because we're trying to prove something, but because I can't imagine coming home to anyone else." The proposal was everything she'd dreamed of and everything she couldn't accept, all wrapped up in Patrick's earnest green eyes and the scent of his cologne in the enclosed space. "I can't," she whispered. "Why not?" "Because you're asking me to choose between loving you and respecting myself." The words came out harsher than she'd intended, but they were true. "You want me to move in with you while I'm facing a forced transfer because we couldn't keep our relationship professional? While people are already saying I've slept my way into your good graces?" Patrick's face darkened. "Who said that?" "It doesn't matter who said it. What matters is that it's being said." Tasha pulled her hand free, immediately missing the warmth of his touch. "Han, the longer this goes on, the worse it's going to get. So we make it public. We tell everyone we're together. Deal with the consequences honestly." Easy for you to say. You're the CEO. In the worst-case scenario, you face some board scrutiny and move on. I become the cautionary tale they tell at HR seminars. The silence that followed was deafening. Patrick stared out the windshield, his jaw working as he processed her words. "You think I don't understand what this costs you," he said finally. "I think you understand intellectually, but you don't feel it. You've never had to worry about whether people respect your professional accomplishments or assume you earned them on your back." The crude language made Patrick flinch, which was exactly what Tasha had intended. She needed him to understand the stakes, even if it hurt. "So what are you saying?" he asked. "That this was all a mistake? That we should just pretend the last month never happened?" "I'm saying maybe we moved too fast. Maybe we should have thought this through before we let it get this far." "Tasha, look at me." His voice was gentle but insistent. When she met his eyes, she saw pain there, but also determination. "Do you love me?" The question was a trap and a lifeline all at once. Tasha felt the truth of it in every cell of her body, the way her heart raced when he walked into a room, the way his laugh could turn her worst day around, the way she'd started planning her future with him in it, without even realizing it. "Yes," she admitted, the word barely audible. "God help me. Yes. Then we'll figure the rest out. Together." What if we can't? What if loving you ruins everything I've worked for? Patrick was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was different, older, sadder. Then, I'll let you go. The words hit her like a physical blow. What? If staying with me means destroying your career, your reputation, everything you've built, then I'll step back. I'll recommend you for the Chicago position myself if that's what it takes. Patrick, no, I love you too much to be the thing that holds you back. His smile was heartbreaking. Even if it kills me to watch you leave. Tasha felt something crack inside her chest. This was what love looked like. Not the grand gestures or romantic dinners, but this quiet willingness to sacrifice everything for someone else's happiness. There has to be another way, she said desperately. Maybe there is, but if there isn't, I need you to know that I'll understand. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. Her phone buzzed, cutting through the intensity of the moment. A text from Linda Hartwell. Need your decision by tomorrow morning. Sorry for the pressure, but the situation is becoming untenable. Patrick saw her expression change as she read the message. What is it? 24 hours. She wants my answer by tomorrow morning. They sat in silence, the weight of the deadline settling over them like a shroud. Everything they'd built together, all the careful moments, the growing intimacy, the fragile hope for a future, had been reduced to a corporate ultimatum. I should go, Tasha said finally. I need time to think. Patrick nodded, though she could see it cost him. I'll drive you home. No, I need some space. I'll take the subway. She reached for the door handle, but Patrick's voice stopped her. Tasha, whatever you decide, these last few weeks have been the happiest of my life. She turned back to look at him one last time. This man who'd seen her truly, who'd challenged her to want more, who was willing to lose everything rather than force her to compromise herself. Mine too, she whispered, then fled before she could change her mind. The subway ride back to Brooklyn was a blur of tears and fluorescent lights. Tasha felt like she was mourning something that had never quite existed, the possibility of having both love and career, the fantasy that she could have it all without sacrifice. By the time she reached her apartment, she'd made her decision. She pulled out her laptop and began typing an email to Linda Hartwell. Her hands shook as she wrote the words that would change everything, but her mind was clear for the first time in weeks. And as she hit send on the message that would determine her future, she wondered if choosing herself over love made her strong, or just very, very alone. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to choose between who you are and who you love. Tasha stood outside the conference room on the 38th floor at exactly 9 a.m., her resignation letter folded neatly in her hand. She'd barely slept, spending the night alternating between crying and staring at the ceiling, but her decision was final. If the choice was between her integrity and her heart, she'd choose both, by walking away from the situation entirely. Linda Hartwell opened the door with her usual professional smile, but her expression shifted when she saw Tasha's face. Oh, my dear, you look like you haven't slept. I haven't, Tasha admitted, following Linda into the conference room. But I've made my decision. And? Tasha took a deep breath, preparing to hand over the letter that would end everything, her job, her career at Dempsey Industries, any chance of a future with Patrick. The conference room door burst open, and Patrick strode in like a man on a mission. He was dressed impeccably as always, but there was something different in his bearing, a controlled fury that made both women instinctively step back. Linda, he said curtly, not even glancing at Tasha, I need to speak with you. Mr. Dempsey, this really isn't the appropriate time. Tasha and I were just discussing her forced transfer. Yes, I'm aware. Patrick's voice was ice cold. What I'm not aware of is under whose authority you're making personnel decisions about my executive staff. Linda's professional composure faltered slightly. Patrick, there are company policies. Policies that I wrote. Policies that require board approval for any punitive action against senior employees. Patrick finally looked at Tasha, and she saw something blazing in his green eyes that made her heart skip. Did you know that Tasha is considered senior staff? Has been for 6 months, actually. Though we never updated her title. Tasha blinked. What? Executive assistant to the CEO is a senior management position in this company. Has been since I restructured the hierarchy last year, which means any disciplinary action against you requires board review and documented cause. Linda was looking increasingly uncomfortable. Patrick, I was trying to handle this discreetly. No, you were trying to handle this illegally. Patrick's voice never rose, but the authority in it was unmistakable. Forcing an employee to transfer based on unsubstantiated gossip, creating a hostile work environment, Do you have any idea what the legal ramifications of this conversation could be? I was protecting the company. From what? Exactly. A relationship between two consenting adults. Because last I checked, we're not a religious organization with morality clauses. Tasha felt the room spinning around her. Patrick, what are you doing? He turned to her then, and his expression softened completely. What I should have done from the beginning. Standing up for us, for you. But the policies are guidelines, not laws, and they certainly don't supersede basic employment rights. Patrick pulled out his phone and began typing. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. We're going to clarify some things about office relationships, professional conduct, and exactly who has the authority to make threats about transfers. Linda looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Patrick, perhaps we can resolve this without involving the board. Oh, we're absolutely involving the board. Because apparently some people in this organization have forgotten that harassment based on perceived impropriety is still harassment. Tasha stared at Patrick, seeing him in a completely new light. This wasn't the protective lover from last night. This was the CEO who'd built a billion-dollar company, the man who could command rooms full of powerful people, and he was using every ounce of that power to protect her. Furthermore, Patrick continued, his attention back on Linda, effective immediately, Tasha's title is being updated to reflect her actual responsibilities, Senior Vice President of Operations, with a salary adjustment to match. Any objections to that promotion can be directed to the board. Patrick, Tasha whispered, but he held up a hand. And Linda, if I hear about any retaliation, any whispers, any attempt to make Tasha's work environment uncomfortable because of this conversation, you'll be explaining your management style to my lawyers. Are we clear? Linda nodded mutely. Excellent. Tasha, could I speak with you privately? Linda practically fled the conference room, leaving Tasha and Patrick alone in the sudden silence. Tasha sank into one of the chairs, feeling like she'd just witnessed a hurricane. You can't just promote me to vice president, she said weakly. I can, and I did. You've been doing the work for months anyway. Patrick sat down across from her, his corporate armor falling away to reveal the man underneath. Tasha, I'm sorry. I should have protected you from this from the beginning. You can't solve everything with executive power. No, but I can make sure you're treated with the respect you deserve. I can make sure no one ever again suggests that your professional success has anything to do with our personal relationship. Tasha looked down at the resignation letter still clutched in her hand. I was going to quit. I know. Patrick's voice was gentle. I could see it in your face yesterday. That's why I spent all night figuring out how to fix this. And if the board doesn't approve the promotion, if they side with Linda, then I'll resign and we'll start our own company. He said it so matter-of-factly that Tasha almost believed he meant it. Tasha, I told you last night that I'd let you go if staying with me meant destroying your career, but I realized something after you left. What? Letting you go would be the easy choice, the cowardly choice. Fighting for you, for us. That's what love actually looks like. Tasha felt tears threatening again, but this time they weren't from despair. You turned the entire corporate hierarchy upside down for me. I'd do it again tomorrow. Patrick reached across the table and took her hands. I love you, Tasha. Not in spite of your strength and intelligence, but because of it. And I want everyone in this building to know that you're here because you're extraordinary, not because you're with me. What if people still talk? Let them talk. They'll figure out pretty quickly that Senior Vice President Tasha Lewis didn't get where she is by accident. Tasha looked at their joined hands, then up at Patrick's face. The fear that had been consuming her for weeks was still there, but it was overwhelmed by something stronger. Gratitude, admiration, and yes, love. Lewis Dempsey, she said quietly. What? If I'm going to be a vice president, I want to do it right. Tasha Lewis Dempsey. Patrick's smile could have powered the entire Manhattan grid. Is that a yes to moving in together? Because I believe that was still on the table. That's a yes to everything, Tasha said, finally allowing herself to believe that she could have both, the career she'd earned and the love she'd never expected to find. And as Patrick kissed her in that conference room, where she'd almost lost everything, Tasha realized that sometimes the best choices aren't about picking sides. They're about refusing to accept that you have to. The best love stories don't end with happily ever after. They begin there. 6 months later, Tasha stood in Patrick's penthouse apartment, their penthouse apartment now, staring out at the Manhattan skyline as the sun set behind Central Park. The view still took her breath away, but it was no longer the view of someone looking in from the outside. This was home. "You're going to be late for your own celebration dinner," Patrick called from the bedroom, his voice carrying that mix of amusement and affection that had become the soundtrack to her new life. "I'm ready," she called back, though she made no move to leave her spot by the window. Tonight was supposed to be about celebrating her first successful quarter as Senior VP of Operations, but Tasha found herself thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The board meeting 6 months ago had been a bloodbath, in the best possible way. Patrick hadn't just defended their relationship. He'd presented a comprehensive review of company policies that resulted in a complete overhaul of HR procedures. Linda Hartwell had been quietly reassigned to a different division, and Tasha's promotion had been approved unanimously. More importantly, she'd proven herself in the role beyond anyone's expectations, even her own. The Morrison account had expanded by 40% under her management. The Chicago office, the same one she'd almost been forced to transfer to, was now begging for her strategies to be implemented nationwide. "Tasha?" Patrick appeared behind her, slipping his arms around her waist. She leaned back against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him, the security of being known completely. "Just thinking," she murmured, about how terrifying it is to get everything you want." Patrick's reflection appeared beside hers in the window glass. "Second thoughts?" "Never." She turned in his arms, taking in the sight of him in a perfectly tailored black suit that made his green eyes even more devastating. "But sometimes I can't believe this is my life now." "Believe it," he said softly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You earned every bit of it." The restaurant Patrick had chosen for tonight was different from Maria, smaller, more intimate, the kind of place where they could actually hear each other talk. As they settled into their corner table, Tasha noticed how naturally they moved around each other now, how the careful distance of their early relationship had evolved into easy intimacy. "So," Patrick said, raising his wineglass, "to Senior Vice President Tasha Lewis Dempsey, who just closed the biggest deal in company history. We're not married yet." Tasha laughed, clinking her glass against his. "It's still just Lewis." "Yet?" Patrick's eyebrows shot up. "That sounds like you've been thinking about it." Heat flooded Tasha's cheeks. They'd been living together for 4 months, and their relationship had settled into something beautiful and sustainable, but marriage hadn't been explicitly discussed. It was more like a shared assumption, a future they both knew was coming but hadn't quite planned. "Maybe I have been thinking about it," she admitted. "Have you?" "Every day," Patrick said simply. "I think about what it would be like to introduce you as my wife instead of my girlfriend. I think about Sunday mornings and retirement plans and what our kids would look like." "Kids?" Tasha's voice squeaked slightly. 2 or 3, smart like their mother, hopefully with your sense of humor and your work ethic." Patrick's smile was soft, dreamy. "They'd probably be CEOs by the time they're 12. "Patrick Dempsey, are you planning our entire future over dinner? Is that a problem?" Tasha considered this. 6 months ago, the idea of someone planning her future would have terrified her. She'd spent her entire adult life carefully controlling every variable, every decision, but with Patrick, the future felt less like something to be managed and more like something to be excited about. "No," she said finally, "it's not a problem." "Good, because I have something I want to ask you." Patrick stood up from the table, and Tasha's heart stopped completely. This wasn't happening. Not here, not now, not— "Tasha," he said, dropping to one knee beside her chair. The entire restaurant seemed to go silent, though that might have been the blood rushing in her ears. "I know this isn't the most original proposal location, and I know we've only been together officially for 6 months, but—" He pulled out a small velvet box, and Tasha felt tears spring to her eyes. "I've been in love with you for so much longer than that. I've been in love with your mind, your kindness, your strength, the way you make everything better just by being there. You've made me a better man, a better leader, a better person." "Patrick," she whispered, but he wasn't finished. "I know you don't need me to take care of you. You're perfectly capable of taking care of yourself. But I want to be the person who gets to celebrate your victories, who holds you when things get hard, who builds something amazing with you." He opened the box, revealing a ring that was absolutely perfect, elegant, but not ostentatious, classic, but uniquely beautiful. Just like everything else about Patrick, it showed how carefully he'd been paying attention. "Tasha Lewis, will you marry me?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and promise. Tasha looked down at Patrick, this man who'd seen her truly from the beginning, who'd fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself, who'd helped her believe she deserved everything she'd worked for. "Yes," she said, laughing through her tears. Yes, of course, yes. The kiss that followed was witnessed by a restaurant full of strangers who burst into spontaneous applause, but Tasha barely noticed. All she could focus on was Patrick's hands, shaking slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger, the way he looked at her like she'd just given him the world. Later, as they walked through Central Park under the stars, Tasha's new ring catching the light from the street lamps, she thought about the photo that had started everything, that spontaneous moment of joy on a beach that had led to a mistaken text, that had led to everything that mattered most. Regrets? Patrick asked, as if reading her thoughts. About what? About accidentally sending that photo to your boss instead of your best friend. Tasha laughed, remembering the panic she'd felt that morning in the office. It seemed like a lifetime ago. No regrets, she said, squeezing his hand. Best mistake I ever made. The best things usually start with mistakes, don't they? Or with being brave enough to see mistakes as opportunities. Patrick stopped walking and pulled her close, right there in the middle of the path where they could see the city lights reflected in the reservoir. I love you, future Mrs. Dempsey. I love you too, future Mr. Lewis Dempsey. And as they kissed under the New York sky, both of them understood that some stories don't end with the wedding proposal. They begin there, with two people who chose to build something beautiful from a single moment of unexpected courage. 2 years later, the beach house in the Hamptons was everything Tasha had never known she wanted. Weathered shingles, wide porches, and windows that let in so much light it felt like living inside sunshine. She stood on the deck, watching the waves roll in as the morning sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. Coffee's ready, Mrs. Dempsey, Patrick called from the kitchen, and Tasha smiled at the title she still wasn't quite used to. They'd been married for 8 months now, and she still felt a little thrill every time someone called her by her new name, though at work she'd kept Lewis Dempsey, a perfect compromise that honored both who she'd been and who she was becoming. Coming, Mr. Dempsey, she called back, taking one last look at the ocean. The view reminded her of that day at Montauk Beach. Was it really only 2.5 years ago, when she'd taken that spontaneous photo that changed everything? Inside, Patrick was plating fresh croissants beside steaming mugs of coffee, still in his pajamas, and looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him during their corporate days. The kitchen was all white cabinets and marble counters, the kind of space that belonged in magazines, but Patrick had insisted on a breakfast nook with mismatched chairs and a view of the garden. Any regrets about taking the weekend off? He asked, handing her a mug with extra cream, just the way she liked it. From our own company? Never. Tasha settled into her favorite chair, tucking her legs under her, though I still can't believe we actually did it. Lewis Dempsey Consulting had been Patrick's idea, but it had become their shared dream. He'd stepped down as CEO of Dempsey Industries exactly 1 year ago, and they'd launched their own firm specializing in corporate restructuring and executive development. It was smaller than what they'd left behind, but it was theirs, built on their terms with their values. Marcus called yesterday, Patrick said, sitting across from her. His daughter got into Columbia, full scholarship. Really? Tasha's face lit up. Marcus had left Dempsey Industries 6 months after they did, but they'd stayed close. That's incredible. Sophia's going to be an amazing lawyer. He wanted to thank you again for writing her recommendation letter. She earned it herself. Tasha paused, smiling at the memory of the serious 12-year-old who used to practice piano in the building lobby while waiting for her father to finish work. Remember when she told me she was going to be the first person in her family to go to college? And you told her she was going to be the first person in her family to graduate from law school. Confidence is everything, Tasha said, echoing something her mother had told her years ago. Patrick's phone buzzed and he glanced at it with a frown. Riley again. She's very insistent about this lunch next week. She's been weird lately, Tasha agreed. Secretive. I think she's seeing someone new and doesn't want to tell me because he's probably inappropriate in some way. Like a boss? Patrick suggested with a grin. Very funny. Tasha threw a piece of croissant at him. For the record, you were completely appropriate. Just terrible timing. The best things usually have terrible timing. They sat in comfortable silence, reading their respective sections of the newspaper, a Saturday morning ritual they'd developed. Patrick worked through the business section, while Tasha caught up on local news, occasionally sharing interesting headlines across the table. Listen to this, Tasha said, reading from her tablet. Local woman starts foundation to support professional development for women of color. So she's only 26 and already raised $2 million. Sounds like someone you'd want to meet. Already sent her an email. Coffee meeting Tuesday. Tasha looked up at Patrick over her tablet. What? We could use someone like her on our advisory board. I love that you're always thinking 3 steps ahead. I learned from the best. She reached across the table to squeeze his hand. Speaking of which, the presentation for the Morrison Group is ready. Want to practice it this afternoon? On our vacation weekend? It's not vacation, it's remote work. There's a difference. Patrick laughed, bringing her hand to his lips to press a soft kiss to her wedding ring. What did I do to deserve you? Sent an inappropriate text message to the wrong person, Tasha deadpanned. That was you. Details. Later that afternoon, they walked down to the beach, hand in hand. The sand was warm between Tasha's toes, and the ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Other couples and families dotted the shoreline, children building sandcastles, teenagers playing volleyball, elderly couples reading in beach chairs. Take a picture with me, Tasha said, suddenly pulling out her phone. Here? Patrick looked around at the ordinary scene, the unremarkable stretch of beach. Right here, right now. She held up the phone, angling it to capture them both with the ocean in the background. I want to remember this exact moment. Patrick wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. What's special about this moment? Everything, Tasha said simply. The fact that we're here together, that we built something beautiful from a mistake, that we're happy. She took the photo, and they both looked at the screen. Patrick's hair was messed up from the ocean breeze, and Tasha had sand on her cheek, but they were both laughing, both completely present in the moment. Send it to Riley, Patrick suggested. Let her wonder what you're up to for once. Tasha scrolled through her contacts, found Riley's name, and attached the photo. As she was about to hit send, she paused, remembering another photo, another moment when everything changed. What are you thinking about? Patrick asked, noticing her hesitation. Just how different things could have been. If I hadn't made that mistake, if I'd been more careful with my phone that day. Do you wish you had been? Tasha looked at the photo again, at Patrick's arms around her, at the joy on both their faces, at the evidence of a life she'd never planned but couldn't imagine living without. No, she said, hitting send. I don't wish anything had been different. As they walked back toward the house, the sun beginning to set behind them, Tasha felt the same sense of possibility she'd experienced that day at Montauk Beach, but deeper now, more certain. She'd learned to trust her instincts, to believe she deserved the life she wanted, to take risks that scared her. Patrick stopped suddenly, pulling her close for a kiss that tasted like salt air and promise. I have something to tell you, he said against her lips. What? I love you, Tasha Lewis Dempsey. Still, always. Still and always, she agreed, kissing him back as the waves crashed behind them. Because some love stories begin with mistakes and end with forever, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, forever is just the beginning. Would you have made the same choice Tasha did? What did this story teach you about taking risks for love? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.